Hello and welcome to Seeing Jesus with Paul Miller. I'm Liz Voboril and I'm here with Paul and Jon H, our director for West Coast and East Asia. And we are here continuing our conversations around beauty and discipleship. We like to say, see Jesus. Lots of organizations work on wonderful things being the hands and feet of Jesus around the world. And see Jesus sees its particular calling as working on the imagination and the heart. And so really here, much of what we're doing is growing our imagination for discipleship and what is the role of beauty in that. So in thinking about all that, Paul, I've remembered a quote that it's a thing you said the first time I heard it was a number of years back, but you had said, there's a way in which often the church has been stronger on sin identification and weak on beauty formation. So I just thought, that's an interest. It's a lot about what are we. I mean, they're obviously both
right,
intended
correct.
to move in a similar direction,
Right,
but they
right.
work in a synergistic way.
Right.
Anyway, let's pick that up. Paul, is that?
Yeah. And that's not negative on sin identification. I actually think
you're a big believer in sin identification.
I am a very big believer in that. In sin, because it's just that they are mirrors of one another. The beauty of Christ, which God is by His Spirit is forming in us, is where we're going, and sin is the missing of the mark. But if you're just talking about sin, it's just like getting, let's say a toddler who gets yelled, who's just kind of bad, and they just get yelled at all the time. And what's the slogan you see sometimes on office walls, like the morale? The beatings will stop when morale improves.
Right. Exactly. Right. Yes.
Now, I actually think the church is actually not even doing the beatings anymore.
Weak on both. Well,
yeah.
There is a sense in which I was just even thinking about my work and how we work on our home, right? And round things out. Like if I made my mission to eradicate all bugs from ever entering my home and I'm just going to kill bugs, I'm not going to do anything else. We're not going to get cushions for the couch or think about things on the wall until the bugs are all dead. Like, I think it'd be really depressing for my family too, right?
Yeah.
So there's a sense in which you do have to work at both.
Like, or if if you're learning a sport, if you never get any, if your coach just yells at you when you make a mistake, as opposed to gives you a vision of what it'd be like, hey, we can win this pennant. And, the kind of the positive things that a coach will say, or the encouragements that coaches are prone to be more negative than positive. But let me make it, bring it down and make it concrete. And this is very fresh in my to me, because I had a conversation yesterday with a woman. Her husband left her. I just wanted to see how she was doing, and I wasn't 10 minutes in the conversation, and I was really moved. And it kept getting deeper by the beauty of her obedient life. It was like seeing a little Grand Canyon for me. And so it was like, the betrayal was so devastating. And that happens in really severe betrayal that you lose your bearings and you're confused. And if you can get lost in thinking, what did I do, or where did I go wrong? You know what I mean? You could just get in a morass. And she, for the first several months, she prayed through the Psalms every week. She actually did the math. It was like every 4 days she prayed through all 100. So she'd be up at night praying through all the Psalms. Some from memory, and she was just clinging to God, and just the beauty of hearing her So this has been a year now of her coming through this valley of the shadow of death, which she still is in, but not in the severe. It was so moving to me. I mean, it actually, instead of listening to a podcast on a bike ride I took, I did the same thing. It just inspired me to listen to the Psalms. And it was just, like, it's a beautiful thing. And like churches, I long for church leaders to have an eye for beauty in to call people to that kind of that radical obedience. There was no bitterness, nothing. I mean, she's two little kids, former husbands being difficult, as you can imagine, having to now put food on the table. Just the beauty without her obedience without bitterness. It's just the pure presence of Christ.
Well, and as you say that, Paul, I am thinking too, that isn't I'm not sure that everyone would automatically say, "Oh, that's beauty," right? Like, so part of it's even like growing our imagination for seeing the beauty. Because I hear you in that, and I have seen that beauty is surprising, right? But it's not necessarily our first blush fleshly sense of beauty. It's something deeper than that you're speaking about.
Yeah, it's a beauty that you have to be trained to. You have to, if you don't work at that beauty in your own life, you're not going to see it in other people's lives.
Right. I'm thinking of it like as like an ear to hear music, right? It's sort of an eye it is that training of the eye to see a kind of a beauty.
Yeah.
And I think in the last episode, we talked about how beauty kind of sneaks up on you. Like, I had a similar experience in walking with a bunch of young, I guess they're young men, late teens, early 20s. And for a year, we were focused on their desire to grow in their sexual integrity and purity. And I think the process, what struck me, I forgot how many weeks into the meeting, the series of meetings where their pure desire and hunger for righteousness was being expressed by a lot of them, and their growing obedience. It caught me off guard because I started to well up and tearing up, and I couldn't. It kind of caught me off guard in the sense that I wasn't even sure why I was tearing up, and so part of it was admiring their desires, the purity of their hearts. But looking back on it now, it was just a beautiful moment of their genuine desire for obedience. And when it comes to that particular area of life, I think for good reason, we've sometimes focused very much on sin identification. And there is good in terms of, Colossians 3 and putting sin to death. And all of that is very important when it comes to any area of life, let alone this one. But I think sometimes we miss it's not just cutting out the bad, but actually getting full on the good. And so I think I was tasting the fullness of goodness being lived out and expressed in that meeting. And it brought me to tears.
Yeah.
It's
beautiful.
Really beautiful. Yeah. I've thought there's a way sometimes in which that beauty, that moving, it gets at that inspiration of the heart, the yearning, right? It's like the ceiling being lifted way up, right? And that is the farther up, farther in, the beauty of that journey. And that is part of what you're saying there is like, it makes a lot of sense. That area of life is full of the not to do, and so that grow up into this instead. Like, this is beautiful, this oak of righteousness.
And when the beauty is and what we're looking at, if you think of Plato's triad, if that confuses you, just forget about it. But what you're looking at is goodness. You're looking at the combination of truth and goodness. What's the truth? Her husband betrayed her, and that was a terrible thing that he's done, and you're seeing the truth of her, and then you're seeing just the sheer goodness of how she endured this suffering, this deep suffering that God has permitted in her life. And so what that allows me then to do as a fellow believer on a beauty hunt, which is identical to a Jesus hunt, it allows me to enjoy her as a person. So, so she feels my enjoyment of her beauty, and all of a sudden her life has weight. She's not just enduring, but there's value to that.
I think there's a celebration of what you see, and I don't know if she felt this way, but I know the boys that I was meeting with, they were, as I began to celebrate and enjoy what they were expressing and their desires, they were kind of surprised. Like they were a little bit unaware of the beauty of what was being displayed. And so part of the role of a discipler in that instance is not to speak more truth into it, but to just describe what's happening at this moment and how significant it is, and for them to be able to appreciate that as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking too, there's a way in which in both of those stories, you're enjoying Christ in them too, the hope of glory. That's
so.
part of, that's what it is that it gives the weight, So it is, that's that hunt. So yeah, I guess Paul, like for people who are listening, who are like, I want to see more of this. Why don't I see this beauty? Or how do I develop eyes? Like, do you sell glasses? seeJesus, you talked about it. Like, how do you begin to see this more? What would you say?
Well, it's like anything, the more you dive into it, it sort of envelops me. So let me just give you an example of the way Paul does it. So let me partly punt. So the Apostle Paul, and so we're now in Ephesians 2, and so he's talking about our salvation. Verse 8: For by grace you've been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing; it is a gift of God, not a result of work, so that no one may boast. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works that God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. So we are his work, like God is creating our salvation begins this process of the beauty of Christ. We are his workmanship. So he's the artist working on us. And then the result is for good work, so that we then become artists ourselves. So then if you go up to chapter 4, you could see, here's just a clear example. Paul's all doing this all through Ephesians, but chapter 5, he begins this. So this is in his section on goodness, okay, on love, Ephesians 4, 5, and 6. So he begins chapter 5. Therefore, be imitators of God as beloved children, and walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. Paul just painted a picture of beauty, of the beauty of Christ's love. And he even mentions the fragrance of the sacrifice of Christ. And then he goes, now he's, so that vision, so it's a vision of beauty, oddly enough, not focused on the atonement for us, but us reenacting the atonement. Does that make sense? So, and then he goes right into sexual, but sexual immorality and all impurity or covetousness must not even be named in you, as is proper among the holy ones, among the saints, among beautiful people. Like, you almost want to put in beautiful people. That would, not recommending that, so there's there's this beautiful thing that Paul is crafting in us. So all Ephesians, Paul is Michelangelo at the Piazza, chiseling Christ out of the stone in us. And it just, so if you begin to get a vision of that, it keeps obedience from just being boring or drudgery, or, you know what I mean? It's what it's this, I'm on this whole voyage. The voyage is not the right word. I'm on this journey or pilgrimage of becoming like Jesus, of the bride being prepared.
I like that imagery of artistry or craftsmanship. I'm not much of an artist, but I know that, if you take a big stick and you do a drawing in the sand near the shore, it's something that maybe only you can see, you can enjoy. You stand back, you enjoy it, and then the water comes and washes it away, and no one else ever sees it. And I think oftentimes in obedience, especially when it comes obedience in love of Christ and for the sake of the other, that it's sometimes like that. Like when we're loving others, it no one else is going to see it. We're kind of working on it, and it's something to be crafted for the enjoyment of the Father. And at one moment, maybe we can stand back and enjoy it ourselves because it's the beauty of Christ in us. And then in some senses, it just gets washed over and forgotten, not by God, but by no one else ever sees it and enjoys it in the same way. But when we kind of picture it that way, it gives some temporary purpose to it at the moment. I without going into all the details, I was thinking about, we were cleaning out somebody's garage, and they were unable to do that for themselves. And so we ended up taking out 12 huge black plastic bags full of stuff and taking it to the curb and waiting for, the trash to come and pick it up. And I remember pausing and just admiring those 12 bags, and there's been other times where I think my heart is full of self-righteousness, but at that moment I was just admiring the beauty of those bags and what it represented. And then, the trash man came up and picked it up and they're all gone.
Right. Just some related ideas that I think are in this whole idea of beauty formation, and I might be going outside of the bounds of beauty, but within the Reformation world, we have, there's these three uses of the law: the first, second, and third use. And the first use is the law. What are the purposes of the law? It has three distinct functions. Okay. So the first function then, or what they call the first use of the law, is for a orderly society. You shall not murder, don't commit adultery, like all these. And then there's sub laws of, don't run red lights, like that. That's all, good uses of the law. And it's a great heritage of Western civilization, particularly the situation that, that it has a heritage of law keeping. And there's a real beauty in that. The second use of the law tends to be the biggest one that I actually hear in preaching, is that the law functions to bring me to Christ. So you can see that in Romans 7. I mean, it's all over Scripture, Romans 1 and 2 and 3, where Paul uses the law to bring us to Christ, because the law shows us that we can't get to Christ on our own. And it is for a new Christian, for an old Christian to realize that you can, that you don't, work your way to Jesus, that our problem is, that our law keeping is so huge that we need a savior to die for our sins. Our law breaking is so huge. And so that's a really bad summary of Romans 1, 2, and 3. But so the law functions to bring me to Christ. And the third use of the law is that it's a path and guide for obedience. And the law does function that way. This is not so much a quarrel with that. It's just that why not? We are living in the age of the Spirit now. So what about 3 uses of Jesus? That like that. Particularly, I'm talking about the third use of the law. And again, I am not being negative on preaching the law. Please understand me. Our churches need more like regular preaching through the 10 Commandments so that people get, and particularly, this is a segue, a reasoning towards obedience. I hear so little reasoning towards obedience. Like, why shouldn't you shack up with your girlfriend or boyfriend, after college? There's a lot of good reasons that you could, Atlantic Monthly had a series of articles a dozen years ago that were just some of the best sermons I've heard on why you shouldn't shack up with someone. It was just talked about how the woman who wrote it interviewed all these girls and how devastated it was to feel like you were on this, on this tryout with your boyfriend for multiple years and wasting all your 20s. Anyway. So I did say this was a segue. So I am not knocking at all in the least bit. We need more teaching on reasoning towards, like, let me give you reasons why this is really not a good idea. We shouldn't be embarrassed by the beauty of our faith, and the law is beautiful. I mean, that's one of the, you can't read Psalm 119, Psalm 19 particularly, talks about the beauty of the law. So within the law itself, but what we find in the New Testament is, and my old analogy for this is that the law is like a bucket. And when you put it into the sea of love, it fills automatically. There's this vast sea of love that we get introduced to in the New Testament that has its roots completely in the Old Testament. I'm not, I can always come into mind as all these different heresies that you can go. So the heresy I was thinking of then was, I think his name is Marcion, an early bishop in the early 2nd century, who said, let's get rid of the Old Testament. And he just had Luke and Paul's epistles. So he wanted to get rid of, anyway, that's a heresy. We aren't talking about this, but in the New Testament, we encounter this beauty formation shaped around love, which is the imprint of Jesus. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're going towards.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Paul, I'm interested in your talking about the reasoning, because I feel like oftentimes it's sort of like, well, the law is the law. You should just obey the law because it's the law. Like that's sort of like how mostly I've experienced thinking about the law, like minus reasoning to obey the law, because it feels like, well, the authority of the law. You just stand under you got to do it because you got to do it. So talk about the reasoning and how that plays into beauty and discipleship.
Oh my. I could just give you some examples. It permeates, say, the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus is getting you to, he reasons with you. Like, he just doesn't say in Judges 7, judge not. And people tend to take it out of context, because in the next, he says, judge not, or you will be judged. So reasoning. What Jesus is reasoning? Like, do you want all the negative things you say as other people, do you want that to be your standard on Judgment Day? Jesus is saying. And so he's reasoning, he's getting you to think about it, and, Tim Keller, actually, I heard this in a sermon many years ago, some 20 years ago, that he said, so imagine that every time you say something negative, about someone, a little recorder goes on, and that recorder is then your standard that you're going to be judged by. And then at Judgment Day, you hear the playback of all those judgments. And then your life is exposed to your own judging. It's just like that's reasoning towards obedience. And the other one, then right after that, Jesus says, judge not, or you will be judged. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. I could be getting Luke conflated here with Matthew 7, but whatever. So, in other words, what that does, if you're thinking about it, he's just like, you might want to shut down a little bit on the volume of your judgments. And then he goes on, and I'm not going to get into it because it's a whole thing, but then he goes on, and then right after that is take the beam out. So then he gives you a workaround, take the beam out of your own. Well, how do you know what your beam is? Then you could go to Romans 2, is that in the beginning there, that usually the things that bother us about other people, we have a problem with ourselves. So that it's a reasoning towards it, getting people to think about that, sin is unthinking. We are often driven by our desires. And so one of the themes of our teaching has been thinking in prayer, thinking in love, thinking in obedience. Obedience is a slightly different nuance on love. So anyway, this is self-control on my part to not keep going.
I think in the reasoning of the law, I hear the wisdom of the law. It's like you're pleading to the wisdom of what's being said, and the net result of not only if you don't go down this path, it's going to be bad in this way, but also if you go down this path, this is a path of towards goodness. And so kind of connecting with the second thing that you said, Paul, was that Jesus in some ways is the path of wisdom, of the law being lived out beautifully and perfectly to follow.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep. And that kind of gets to where I was reading something the other day, and the author commented that there's a way in which our imagination for life functions kind of down at the operating system level of the human person, right? And so part of having, we want to have a Jesus-shaped imagination for life, which means the ceiling on obedience and love and beauty getting worked into our lives is really high. Like there's so much room to grow. And that's part of, I think, even as a parent, like why I want my kids to see beauty, have a vision for the beauty of a life well lived, because it's a lot more than like doing your homework and making your bed, though those things are important. But to have their imagination expanded, and that I think puts a lot of energy in discipleship, because there's a lot further up and further in to go.
Yeah. And just to rehash what we've said before, is that it's beauty in the whole discipling process. You have a discipler and those people being discipled. And, of course, a lot of discipleship just happens just because people just on their own. But so it's developing, eager to see beauty formed in your own life. then eager to see beauty formed in other people's lives. So you're looking for it, you're hunting for it, you're working towards it. And then when you see beauty, celebrating that. Like there's all these different ways of layering that. Here, that it's what we were saying there just made me think of a prayer that I pray. And this is Colossians 9:1-9. And it is my prayer that your love may abound more and more. And then look what what he adds to that and then he adds, so how does he want to shape that? With knowledge and all discernment. So you can see the wisdom piece coming in there, so that you may approve what is excellent. But there's beauty there. So you're developing an eye for good things, for what's in your own life and other people. And so be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God. So the beauty formation actually has an end goal in your getting ready for heaven.
All right. Well, that's great. Everyone, I hope you have a great beauty hunting rest of the day. Thank you, Jon. Thank you, Paul. We'll be back again in a couple of weeks with another episode.